A few weeks ago, I made an episode that was all about visual push-up. A lot of people wrote in and asked, can you please tell us how you did the post-processing?
Adorama TV presents Exploring Photography with Mark Wallace, where you will learn innovative techniques on shooting a wide range of photography. Here's your host, Mark Wallace.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Exploring Photography right here on Adorama TV. I'm Mark Wallace. Well, on Adorama TV a few weeks ago, I made an episode that was all about visual push-ups, something that Jay Mizell talks about, getting outside and exploring the world of photography for the sake of increasing your photography skills. Now, a lot of people commented on YouTube and my Facebook page and wrote in and asked, can you please tell us how you did the post-processing? Because what people were finding was they were doing the same exercises, but their photos didn't look like my photos. And really the key to this is when you're out there shooting, make sure you shoot in RAW. Because when you're shooting in RAW, you're going to be getting a lot of things that you can later pull out of those photos. It's sort of like mining for gold or diamonds. You're going to have lots of colors. You're going to have lots of details in the shadows. There's going to be all kinds of things that you can take into Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever your photo editor is and pull that data out and make some awesome photography and make some awesome art. Now, I personally am using Lightroom 4 for almost all of my post-production tonal corrections and enhancements. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to show you how I took those photos from that episode and we are going to throw those into Lightroom 4 and pull all that data out and make those photos look really punchy. So let's get started right now in Lightroom 4. Well, I'm in Lightroom and these are the photos that showed up in that visual push-ups episode. And you can see that they have a lot of just really vibrant colors. They're really punchy. They're very contrasty. When I show you these, they look like exactly what we saw in that episode. But let me show you exactly what they look like when they came out of the camera. So I'll go in here and just pull up these images. And notice this grill right away. You can see that it's just sort of bland. There's not much there. This image here just doesn't have a lot of character. So how did I get from those really bland images to something that was much more dramatic? In fact, just let's take a look at this. So on the left, this is the before image. On the right, this is the post-processed image. Now, it's very simple. Really what I did was I tried to do two things: increase the contrast and increase the saturation. And so to demonstrate exactly what's happening here, I want to take this grill right here and we'll jump into the develop module and we will really quickly take this from how it came out of the camera to how I presented it in the episode. Now I really want to do a few things. I want to make this contrasty, in other words, the difference between the darkest and the brights. I want those to be really spread out. And then I also want to bring out the colors that are hidden in this grill. There's a lot of orange here in this area that you can't see. There's some blues. There's just a lot of things going on. And so what I do immediately when I have an image like this is I will go over here to the develop module and I'm going to be playing with the exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, whites, blacks, clarity, vibrance, and saturation. That's really where we're going to live in this episode. Well, the first thing I notice is that my histogram shows me I have a lot of area to the right that's just doesn't have any data. In other words, this is underexposed just a little bit. In fact, it's underexposed almost a stop. So what I'm going to do here is take my exposure and go up about a stop. So that's just a little over a stop. And still it looks sort of washed out. There's really no blacks. And we can see here in our histogram, there aren't any blacks in this image. Now what I could do is go to my black slider and slide that down and start getting some of that detail in. But I don't want to do that because there's a slider that will do that for me in addition to fixing the other side. In other words, the highlights. And that's the contrast slider. So what I'll do here is I'm just going to take this all the way over to the right, 100%. And that's going to stretch out and give me all my blacks and dark shadows. And it's going to give me my whites and my highlights. And so now we're starting to get some contrast here in this image. The next thing I want to do is pull up my clarity. Now, clarity, it's best understood, I'll magnify this a little bit, by showing what happens when we take the clarity down. When we take it down, it just sort of softens everything. It's almost putting like a Gaussian blur on the photo. And so a lot of people use that to fix skin blemishes. Well, in this, I want the opposite. I want it to show all the details. So I'm going to take it to the right, and notice how these edges really become dark. It's sharpened a little bit, and so it's sort of like contrast / sharpening. So you would never want to do the clarity to the right on a portrait as far as I've just done it, because it shows every little detail. But in this grid, this little grate here, that's exactly what I want to do. So I just yank that over to the right. And that's one of the tools that you'll play with a lot in images like this, that clarity slider. Now I'm putting this all the way to the max. It's something I normally wouldn't do, but on this image, it works. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to take up the vibrance. Now vibrance and saturation both take the colors and make them punchier. They make them more vibrant, more saturated. The difference is vibrance takes colors that aren't very saturated and brings those up. Saturation takes all of the colors and brings them up equally. So normally you'd be playing with vibrance, not saturation. In this image though, I'm going to play with both. So I'm going to take my vibrance and I'm going to take it all the way up, 100%. And notice now that gray turns to blue because there's actually blue hidden in those details. But I still don't have that orange that I really wanted. And so I'm going to take the saturation and I'm going to take that up. So I'm really overdoing it. So I'm going to take that up into the 60s a little bit. So about 63 I think will be good. And now look, we have blues, we have oranges, we have yellows, we have all kinds of color. And what I can do is I'm going to hit the shortcut key Y, the Y key. And on the left now you'll see the before. And on the right you'll see the after. And that's just something you can do in Lightroom to compare your before and after shots. Hit the Y key. You can see all that blue that came out there, all that yellow that we got out of there, all these contrasty features we got out of this image. And it's really punchy that way. So that's how I got the grid to look the way it does. Let's look at another image, one that a lot of people were talking about on my Facebook page. And it's this image right here. This is actually the some incense that I shot that was really tiny. This is about as big as my finger. And so I wasn't really able to fill the frame with this. And you can see that it just needs some post-production work. So we'll hop over into the develop module and we're going to work with these sliders just like we did before. And we're going to fix a few things. So the first thing I want to do here is I want to take this and I'm going to change the color temperature a little bit. I'm just going to take it down to about 5100 in there. And I know I'm going to do that because I want to get some of these blues out of that. That's something I would probably do at the end, but I sort of know what the settings were that I ended up on. So I'm going to do that, and we'll play with that a little bit more toward the end of this edit. The next thing I want to do here is fix my exposure. So once again, when I look at my histogram, there's a lot of room over here on the right that I can play with. So I'm going to take my exposure up about a little bit more than a stop. So not quite 2 stops, but we'll say about right there. And I'm doing that because now notice that I'm not hitting the right side of my histogram, but I'm bringing everything over, and that's going to give me a lot of room to play over here on the blacks, so I can bring some of those blacks in. So last time I took the contrast all the way to max. I'm not going to do that this time. I'm just going to bump it up a little bit. So that's just going to give me a little bit more contrast. And let's just take a look at the before and after. You can see that we're already starting to get more color out of this, more contrast out of this. It's looking pretty good. So what we'll do is we really need to go in and do some things. Now the first thing I want to do, I'm looking here at these, the histogram, I can see I don't really have anything that's absolutely black. So these are just dark grays, these bands. I want those to be black. So I'll go into my blacks slider and I'm going to take that down until I see those blacks starting to really clip actually. So now we're looking to see how these blacks are looking, and they look so much better. So we actually are getting some dark features there. Now the next thing I want to do here is I want to take my highlights up a little bit. So I'm manually changing my contrast. So I'm going to take these highlights up to somewhere up in the 80s here. I'm doing that because I want to get more detail out of the tips of that incense. So that'll be about right, I think about 85, 86. I'm sort of looking at my histogram, looking at these areas right here to sort of see that. Now the other thing I want to do is the blacks aren't quite as dark as I want, but I'm guessing that it's not in the blacks that I really need detail. It's in the shadows. So I'm going to take these shadows and I'm take those actually up a little bit so we actually get detail in the shadows. So I'm going to take that up to about 38, 39, something like that. That's going to show me more detail in the shadowy areas in this building. That's really going to help out. So we've done that, and it's still not as punchy as I'd really like. What's missing? Well, what's missing is the color. And the color we get out of vibrance and saturation, and we need a little bit more punch, and we get that out of the clarity slider. So I'm going to start with the clarity slider. I'm going to take that up to Oh man, look at that. We're starting to get some stuff. So I'm not going to go too far. Just go till it looks sort of neat. So about 50 looks good. Now we're starting to see some detail here on the incense. I really want to get some color out of that, so I'm going to take this guy up. And you can sort of see how this goes. You just sort of play with this and you can season it to taste. So everything looks pretty good. Let's just see if we can get all the overall colors to come along for the ride just a little bit. So we'll just saturate that just a little bit more. And specifically, I'm looking at the smoke to see if that smoke is going to be turning blue, so we can see this detail right in this area right here. And that looks pretty good. But speaking of this smoke and this blue down here, I think I can get even more. But I don't want to take up all the colors because they look pretty good. I just want to touch the blue. So I can do that by coming down here, and we have the hue, saturation, and luminance. So I'm going to take this blue and I'm going to saturate that just a little bit more. So I'll take that up, and you can see that that's really coming along just fine. So I'm going to take that up to, about 70. And look at what I did. I just made all these blues just really, really punch. And if I go in here, you can see that that looks pretty good, but I'd like to be a little bit sharper. So I'm going to sharpen this up quite a bit. I'm going to take it up into the 90s there. And now what we can see is something that looks really nice. We can go to our crop tool, and then you can crop that in to get rid of some of this extra stuff over here that doesn't really apply to the image. And if you've used a high resolution camera like I did, so I used a nice Fujifilm X Pro 1, just got a lot of detail, so cropping out this extra stuff isn't really going to matter too much to you. So I'll do that. I'm just sort of cropping this the way it is, and once we do that, there we have it. So here's the before on the left and the after on the right, and you can see that there's just a dramatic difference in the before and after. Check that out. Just a huge difference. Now we could do this one by one for every single photo here. I'm not going to do that because that would take us hours to go through every photo, but it's essentially the same thing. We're fixing the contrast, we're making the clarity jump up, and we're adjusting those saturation sliders. The saturation sliders really, really make a huge difference. Speaking of saturation, what if we want to take something that is in color and convert it to black and white? So these are great for things that have shape, strong shape. These pipes have really, really strong shape. So let's do that really, really quickly. So in fact, we're not going to actually do it. We don't have time to do that. I'll just jump into the develop module and show you the changes that I made to get it this punchy. So if we go to the unedited image, notice that the histogram doesn't have a lot of blacks, and it climbs lots of midtones, not a lot of whites. In other words, there's not a lot of contrast here. When I go to the edited image, look at how many blacks we have. We have tons of blacks and lots of midtones, so we've got contrast across, so details across the spectrum, which is really what we want. How did I get that? Well, it was pretty simple. So I didn't adjust the exposure at all. We had a good exposure to start with. I took the contrast up. And oh, by the way, before I forget, I actually converted this from color to black and white by clicking black and white right here. And once I did that, I took the contrast up just a little bit, and then I boosted the shadows, and I boosted the whites, and then took the levels of the blacks down. So I made those darker, made the shadows and the whites brighter. And that's how we spread everything around to make that look really good. And the last thing I did was I increased the clarity quite a bit, and we went from something that was sort of drab to something that had a lot of detail. So you can really see the difference in that. So the bottom line is, when you get your images and they just look sort of bland, take them into Lightroom and then start experimenting with these sliders, and just stick with the sliders that I showed you. It's very, very simple. You've got your exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, sliders. On this image here, notice that we didn't really do anything except for we made the blacks darker, so we get these blacks. And then we jumped up the clarity, the vibrance, and the saturation, and we were able to go from sort of a bland image to something that really had some color. It's very, very simple, and it's something that works great for just sort of artistic shots, things that have a lot of color and texture. Those same techniques will not work for portraits, so don't try that. Well, actually do try it and see what you get, but for a really nice texture and color, that's the way it works. Well, there it is. That's how I took those photos and took them from sort of bland to what I consider to be a little bit punchier. And it really is very subjective, so it's up to you to adjust your photos to your taste. And so those are just some examples. You don't have to do what I did, but make your photos look the way that you want them to look. Now, if you're new to Lightroom or Photoshop or digital editing or even photography, don't forget that Adorama TV has hundreds of videos that will give you tips and tricks for shooting in the studio and on location and doing scenic photography in Photoshop and Lightroom and all kinds of things. And if you really want to dig in by topic and join the discussion, then visit the Adorama Learning Center. So in addition to all the videos that are on Adorama TV, there are articles and links and all kinds of great stuff. Because Adorama is more than just a camera store, it's a one-stop shop for all of your educational needs as well. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you again soon.
Want to get the most out of your Adorama photography equipment? Visit our Learning Center where you can read popular articles, how-to tips, buying guides, and product reviews.